present there. Well, here's the good news is you cannot make a wrong decision. And I presume most of you probably already have made the decision, not based on what we'll say, but this is a good chance to sort of review where you've been and the options and the wonderful options that you have ahead of you. As I say, there's no bad decision here. I'm making a pitch for sustainable planning and urban design. And it's an opportunity. Do you want to really have the most leverage for, let's say, these two primary issues that our society is confronting? Climate change, social equity. Of all the disciplines we teach here at ENDD, this is the big one, and it allows you to have some leverage and address these issues. Climate change, you can address through transportation planning, land planning, social equity. We're always trying to figure out how to provide more housing for the people in our society. And you basically learn two skills in this discipline or major. Urban design, this is a design school, you're all aware of that. So we spend a lot of time on what the physical nature of our cities is like. And we back that up with analysis, GIS, and other mathematical or social models. And with these, then, you can affect the outcomes that you want to see in the communities that you live in. Here's just two examples. The River North District, Rhino, is in Denver. This is an old, low-level industrial neighborhood. And it was down on a teal, so artists moved in as a place to have cheap studio space. Well, wherever artists move in, they also live. And so suddenly it became a residential neighborhood. And the city, rather than clamp down on this, realizing that art districts around the country, like Soho in New York, wanted to promote this. So you have to help this community evolve and provide different amenities that normally aren't found in an industrial neighborhood. So one of the projects we've done here at ENDD in the SPUD program is to master plan the Rhino neighborhood. Very similarly, East Boulder is an industrial neighborhood. Boulder, I don't have to tell you, has a crying need for more housing. Again, how do we help this community make that transition? And these are the issues that you address both here in ENDD and then as you leave the program. These are diverse issues and you need a diverse faculty. And if you haven't had a chance to work with any of us, some of you, and I welcome you, and you're just gonna have a great time through the future, even if you don't go into our program, is working with these individuals. These are some of the best professionals I've ever encountered during my entire career. And here's the bottom line, is what you can do with this degree. And that's why I'm one recommended to you. I started out as an architect. My degree is in architecture. And I ended up in planning. One, because I found it's a more stable job base and there's more jobs. Architecture is very project driven, where you're a consultant to a developer or someone who needs a building. In planning, there's jobs in both the public and private sector. Master planning, like we were looking at with Boulder and Rhino. Plan review, the public sector, the private sector will submit plans to a jurisdiction like a city, and it's your job to determine if those plans meet the requirements and laws of the city. And cities have very substantial codes. You also help write those codes. Looking at this sprawl here, but all of that we see in this aerial view here was planned. Someone had to do it, and someone from a planning school did that. And then finally, on the right side here, we see comprehensive planning, where what are the resources that a city needs to grow or change. We saw how, again, with Rhino and with East Boulder, cities are constantly evolving. As a planner, you help react and guide that constant evolution, hopefully creating better opportunities, better life for the people in your community. So this is design at the largest scale. Daniel Burnham, I'm sure you've heard the quote, it says, make no small plans. And this is an opportunity to work at the scale of the city, which means you work with people. So the other design disciplines are much more mechanical, technical. This one is as much social, economic, and political as putting pen to paper. But I invite you to consider it. We'd love to have you. And with that, that's the pitch for sustainable planning and urban design. We hope to see a large number of you joining us over the next years. And I'm sorry, I should have introduced you, Siobhan.
No, I thought Dylan might introduce,
but
but that is fine. I think we can just plug away.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry, Siobhan. I had a student just run into my office to get the Zoom link, so I was helping them get set up. But yes, we'll move on with Siobhan Brooks here in landscape architecture.
Well, that was a really tough act to follow, Scott. The best skill set. I just don't know about that. Well, I'll talk to you a little bit about landscape architecture, because I also think that landscape architecture is a very broad and flexible profession, and it's sort of choose your own adventure. And, there are 100 different kinds of jobs that you could get with this skill set. So I think it's, a wonderfully generalist profession. And that's what I love about it. There are always just so many new things to learn, so many new project types, so many new contexts in which one can work. By now, if you're listening to me, you've probably already taken 1130 and you have a pretty good idea of what landscape architecture is. But in short, it's the design of outdoor spaces, and outdoor spaces at all scales, which makes it sometimes a little bit tricky to define. We design at such a large range of scales, up to the scale of the city, similar to the scale of an urban planner, but also down to the scale of the tiny courtyard. And along with that breadth of scale, we also design at kind of the same level of detail and resolution as an architect. And, we're a discipline that asks you to be a scientist. We engage with the natural sciences in every single project, and we ask you to be an artist. The landscape is like your marble, so you're asked to be a painter and a sculptor in this profession in a way that I really love. And of course, you need to be a humanist. You need to really care deeply about the cultures and the people for whom you design. And all of these prongs of the profession are necessary to repair ecological systems, to repair cultural systems, and to create opportunities for humans to enjoy and to appreciate these environments. So why become a landscape architect? Well, if you really love animals, if you love science, if you love art, if you love people, and if you care very deeply about tackling large-scale, really messy, wicked environmental problems, you should probably join us. I think that landscape architecture probably has the highest potential to develop projects that are climate positive, although there could be some debate over this. And by that, I mean that our projects have the potential to sequester more carbon over time than was required to construct them. And this is due to their incorporation and the reliance upon living materials that sequester carbon, due to our integration of green infrastructure technologies, and because increasingly we rely on materials that are low carbon in the construction process. I think we're also uniquely poised to tackle problems like contaminated environments, contaminated soil and water. And we effectively restore and remediate brownfields and even Superfund sites. So you can think about abandoned factories, landfills. This third picture from the left is actually the landfill on Staten Island being turned into an amazing regional park. And the last thing I'll say is that I think that landscape architects have the greatest power to unify and make cities livable, because without these parks, without the living elements of the city, they're not very habitable. They're hot and they're gray. And we like to keep our cities green and cool. And finally, I think the landscapes that we integrate into the city contribute really powerful to their identity. So New York City would not be New York City without Central Park or Prospect Park. It just wouldn't. If you choose to become a landscape architecture major, you'll work closely with our really wonderful faculty. I've been talking a lot today, guys. We're not going to put you to work in the factory, don't worry. So our backgrounds are really wide ranging, which I think is an asset. And, you know, we've got Danielle Bila with her amazing expertise in pollinators. I'm really interested in cultural landscapes and historical landscapes and contaminated landscapes as well. Emily is an expert in playscapes and also designing for pollinators and design build. And so we've got these really wide-ranging variety of expertise that we would love for you to take advantage of. So we are going to help you, if you decide to major in landscape architecture, develop a really strong foundation in history and theory of landscape architecture, planting design, landform manipulation, restoration, ecological restoration and remediation. You'll develop skills for developing master plans, working in groups, and also green infrastructure technologies. So what would that mean for you upon graduation? Like I mentioned before, it's a really broad profession, and landscape architects engage in a very wide variety of project types. And some landscape architects might choose to specialize in one subfield. Like, I think the landscape architects who become zoo experts, man, they're so lucky. There's a firm in Seattle that specializes in the design of zoos. So that's an internship that you definitely want. But again, there's so many different directions in which you can take this, and different firms have different specialties. And also different firms, or I would say most firms, specialize in a variety of sites and project types. And that can vary along with the scale of the firm. So you might pursue any number of those specializations based on your personality or your general interests. Small firms tend to specialize in a smaller variety of project types. Like you might have a smaller firm that has 10 employees and they really only do residential design. A firm that is closer to 40 or 100 will probably specialize in a wide range of project types. Like they might do botanic gardens and residential design and urban design. And they might even take on federal government contracts as well. But I do want to say that you're not, and this is an advantage, you're not limited to landscape architectural firms. And I know a lot of landscape architects who are extremely happy working in architecture firms or working in engineering firms. So you've got a lot of options. Actually, I think one of the happiest landscape architects I know works for the city of Denver and reviews all of the landscape plans that come in for projects in Denver. And so again, chances are that if you're listening to me, you've already taken ENBD 1130 or you're in it right now. And so you kind of understand what landscape architecture is, and you've been introduced to the topic of urban landscapes and green infrastructure. We carry on with this theme to some degree next semester in Land 2100. There is a greater focus in this studio on community, along with this continued focus on urban landscapes. So the site is Denver's Larimer Square, and students work at the scale of the neighborhood before zooming into a more detailed scale. And they produce these really beautiful books. This studio is coordinated by Danielle Bilot. And I do want to say, because I think I was told to say this, that this is a really good semester for thinking about internships. So if you haven't already, reach out to us, reach out to Nate, and we'll help you brainstorm about where to apply. In semester 5, we introduce more technique and more technology. You'll explore planting design with Emily Greenwood, who is an expert in ecological planting design and in the regional plants of Colorado and Boulder County specifically. You can explore landform materials and green infrastructure technologies with me. And we really focus on technique, technologies, materials, ecological resilience, and master planning skills. In studio, you'll usually take on larger sites in this year. So here is an 80-acre community park in Longmont. And the focus was really on recreation, on play, landform planting, and design for flood mitigation and riparian restoration. Similarly, another Land 3100 with Emily Greenwood focuses on design for play, educational landscapes. And this studio features team master planning and individual detail design as well. And the studio offers a variety of sites in Boulder County. We also offer interdisciplinary design build options. So pictured here is Emily Greenwood's project for the Denver Botanic Garden, the atmospheric water harvesting, and also kind of a pollinator project. Danielle's project, the pollinator parking lot planting design at CU. And around this time, you might also start thinking about study abroad. We offer a variety of study abroad options for landscape architecture, Dublin, New Zealand, and Scotland. And we're especially excited about University College of Dublin because that's a new option for our landscape architects, and their program is great. We spent a lot of time talking to the faculty in Dublin, and they have a really special emphasis on cultural landscapes and history alongside, other options. And finally, in semester 8, you'll complete your capstone studio. And here's an example of what that might look like. We typically invite students at this stage to explore really ecologically and socially complex urban sites like brownfields or contaminated Superfund sites such as Denver's Globeville or Sunnyside neighborhoods. And in this case, we were looking at a degraded and largely impermeable riparian boundary in Denver, which is now the site of Denver's new Meow Wolf Museum. So these studios offer you a great deal of freedom. Usually define your own program, your own site boundary, your own phasing plan, and develop excellent material for your portfolio. After ENVD, you might choose to pursue graduate studies, but you don't need to in order to start practicing. You might decide you want to move directly into the workforce. Earning an MLA could count towards the number of years required for licensure in most states, and it would allow you to expand your professional network, and often it makes it easier to land high-profile firm jobs. And you also have the opportunity to take kind of a deeper dive into topics that really interest you. Like if you really want to learn more about contaminated landscapes, grad school might be a really good option for you. And I'll also say that grad school, and I think everyone here can attest to this because Jade and Dylan and Melissa and Scott, we've all been through it. It's really tough, really, really tough. It's crazy tough. Like people in their sleeping bags under their desks, kind of tough, people never going home. And I don't really condone that. Definitely don't condone that. But the landscape architects had the most fun. And I think they had the most breaks because we got to go outside. So talk to us, talk to your LA faculty if this path interests you. If not, that's fine. You can go directly into the workforce. So graduate studies not required to pursue licensure in Colorado. Most states require that landscape architects attain licensure in order to call themselves a landscape architect, to have that PLA at the end of their name, and PLA stands for Professional Landscape Architect. But if you're not licensed, you would call yourself a landscape designer, and you could practice in partnership with someone who was licensed, and you would be practicing landscape architecture just like any other licensed landscape architect. The licensure requirements vary from state to state, but most states will require a formal degree, some work experience, and you have to pass the 4 CLARB licensing exams. And I'll also say that most states allow reciprocity. So if you get licensed in Colorado, you could take that to Virginia, or you could take that to New Jersey, and you probably just have to pay a couple $100 and your license applies in that new state as well. Maybe it's more than a couple $100. I haven't actually checked. And then in California, I think California has additional exam requirements because of earthquakes. So in Colorado, a bachelor's in EPOD will count towards one of the 6 years of work experience required for licensure. So you work for 5 years and you can take the exams during that time before becoming licensed. And 5 years is really not a long time in the grand scheme of things. And that's kind of the amount of time that you usually need to work in order to feel like, you should be licensed. So whether you choose to become a licensed PLA or you want to practice as a landscape designer, won't make an enormous difference in your day-to-day experience in landscape architecture. You'll go on the best site visits. You'll spend more time in nature, getting some fresh air and sunshine than our other designers, and you'll have great colleagues. In my experience, landscape architects tend to be pretty happy and fun, and they like to get outside and go on adventures, and it makes for a really great work climate.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. I love hearing more about these pathways and licensure, and I think as we continue to move into this major declaration, understanding those professional pathways are so important. So appreciate that perspective. And now we'll move to Jade with architecture, and then we'll follow up with Melissa in product design, and then we'll head to the Q&A. So thanks, Jade.
Great. Thank you so much. I love, one of my favorite things when I'm working with faculty is hearing them talk about their different classes and the different paths. And I'm always like, oh gosh, if I could do it over again, I would love to do this and I would love to do that. And it's so inspiring. So, but I'm going to present architecture. And so, yeah, this is our blurb from our webpage. So you're probably know what an architect is, possibly even before you knew what a planner was, or a product designer, or a landscape architect. But what we're doing is we're thinking about the tectonics, the buildings that we inhabit, and the structures that stand up. So really, the architecture is probably the beginning of our built environment. And kind of that central piece, whereas the planning is more of that like whole scope, and the landscape is oftentimes those spaces that are in between, and all are incredibly important. So, but you're going to be thinking about, many of the different things that Scott and Siobhan spoke about already. So environmental impacts are very important. Buildings take up, they're one of our biggest consumers of material. And so really, and then the energy that it takes to actually run our buildings. So designing sustainable buildings is going to be incredibly paramount in the next coming decades. You have to think about how people interact in a space, what creates a good space and what can be bad. Thinking about the different programmatic elements. So all the parts and pieces that make up a successful design. And materiality, right? How do the interior materials and exterior materials, technology. So not just structure, but also systems, heating systems and plumbing systems, and and electrical systems, right? All those things go together in our buildings. So we were thinking that, for the students that are majoring in our program, we want you to be big thinkers, right? That you're not so much getting into all of the details. Oftentimes you're working and collaborating with engineers to do that. But developing strong design concepts, understanding form of structure, but you do really you need to understand detail of how elements come together so that our projects can really communicate and succeed. So, so this is the architecture discipline. And one thing that's really great with we have so many faculty members, and part of this is because our faculty do actually cross over to other disciplines. So we have someone like Scott who teaches both in the architecture and planning semesters. So so here are kind of our broad spectrum of faculty. A number of our faculty are licensed architects, so that they have worked, they've practiced as well as teaching. So they have real life experience. Some of them are working simultaneously while they're teaching, so they can actually bring real life projects to you and discuss issues that are current and important for you to think about while you're doing your studio projects. So if you specialize in architecture, and this is the same with with all the different majors, you'll have a minimum of 3 specialization studios that you have to take, and you'll take the 2100 typically in year 2, 3100 in year 3. Possibly you'll do another 3100 or maybe even another 2100 in a different discipline or just a general ENBD one, and then your 4100 studio in year 4. And there's 4 required courses that go along with that. So you'll take a class taught by Neil Evers on materials and methods that really looks at all the different components that go into a building and how to apply them. You'll take 2 more history and theory courses. So the first one is taught by Paul Chanowski, and it really looks at the history of architecture from pre-civilization all the way, I think, right up to the Industrial Revolution. So he covers a really broad spectrum of topics and dives much deeper than you get in history of the built environment. And then Marianne Holbert will take you sort of from, I think it's either the beginning of Industrial Revolution, it might be futurism, all the way up to contemporary design. So, so you really get this broad understanding of the history of architecture. We really encourage you in your 3rd year, if you're not taking additional studios, to spend a semester studying abroad or taking an ENBD 3100 that might be something sort of like a design build studio. And then in your 4th year, Kimberly Drennan will work with you on building tech, which is an investigation of building technology, right? The systems that go into buildings, structural systems, and also sustainable practices. So she covers a lot right there, and really how to apply it in the profession so that you can get a job ideally right after school, or be able to apply to graduate program. So these are just some projects from some of these different studios. The 2100 is a coordinated studio. Right now, Brandon Anderson is teaching it. This is a project that was from a research, a greenhouse and education center that was along Boulder Creek. And so these students started with these abstractions. They studied some really beautiful precedents and kind of took them apart and then thought about the important pieces that went into them. And then they moved forward with designing their project. So the space over here on this side is the greenhouse, and then the space over here is this education center, and it's right along Boulder Creek. And so here you can work in different media. So sometimes you'll spend a lot of time doing digital renderings. Other times for this class, this section, these students really wanted to do a lot of hand drawings. This is a 3100. This is actually, Neil Evers taught this one along with Siobhan. So they did it as a combined studio where she worked with landscape architecture students and he worked with architecture students, which was great. This was before Meow Wolf was, when it was proposed and before it was built. And so it was a really tight site. And I haven't been to it yet. Hopefully some of y'all have. But what they did design was this kind of phenomenal building that's like right wedged into a few different spaces in the highway. But the students here were proposing some ideas for how do we create this really exciting space that's a museum and this kind of interactive art experience. So you can see that they really took their own artistic skills and kind of ran with it to make an exciting structure. Oops, my dog is going to start barking in a second, maybe. And then this was a 4100 studio. So this level work, we're really expecting you to be integrating the things that you've learned in your materials and your history and your building tech courses. This was a design by a student for a ski lodge in Avon. My 3100 class is actually doing a ski lodge right now, so which is interesting. But this is a really complex project involving hotels and dining. And you can see that much larger square footage. So you typically start with a smaller project and then work larger. So hypothetical projects that you might do in studio are museums, schools. Let's see, we typically don't do residences, although every once in a while we do. Brandon Anderson is teaching the 2100, and they're doing micro housing, but they're basically doing it as a module in the Rhino neighborhood. And so they're combining lots of different housing types to create one structure. So we really give you kind of the broad spectrum of programs that you might do as an architecture student. I am definitely a huge advocate of spending time abroad if you can, and also really learning how to construct things. So 2 programs that we offer, Hota Semper brings people to Medellin, Colombia, and Marianne Holbert brings students to Rome. Those are 2 experiences. I think that Uzzer is bringing some students to Paris this May as a global seminar, and Brandon Anderson is bringing some students to Venice. So really great opportunities, whatever your major is. I would say try to travel as much as you can to kind of create that inventory of design styles. And then these 2 images are from a design build, 2 different design builds that I've done over the years, working with an organization in northern New Mexico called the Llama Foundation. And so this one in the middle, we were designing a small residence for an elder who lived there. And we were super proud of getting all of our framing up. We had done this as traditional timber frame, mortise and tenon. So we were really excited when it all came together. And then this one on the right is a bathhouse that has 3 shower stalls and a sink, kind of indoor outdoor space. And we do those in the summertime. So, but other people, Marcel does design build projects along with a number of other faculty that do. So if you graduate with an ENVD degree, major in architecture, similar to some of the things that Siobhan said, there's 2 different paths you can take. You can get a master's in architecture, which typically takes 2 to 3 years. Some schools give you advanced standing for your ENVD degree, but then there's some schools that don't. You can, and then, so you graduate then, and then you will work with an internship. If you don't do that, you typically will spend about 6 years working. So it's about even. I definitely encourage people to attend graduate school because it's just an opportunity. I mean, it is hard, like Siobhan said, and it's just this amazing opportunity to develop your own style and figure out what you want to do. I would highly encourage you to work for a year or 2 before going and getting your master's. You can get credit for that. You can actually start getting credit for working, I believe, at the end of your sophomore year. So that's a good time for internships. If you're working under a licensed architect, you can start accumulating that credit. It typically takes, you can get your license in as quickly as 8 years, but I believe that it tends to be closer to 10 or 11. So just the amount of time that it takes to work and then take all of your tests. So you'll work and then you will take your ARE exams. There's 7 exams. They're always changing them just a little bit. I tended to actually enjoy my exams, although the studying for them I didn't. But once I got in there, it was sort of like solving a puzzle and figuring out how to, what do I really know? What do I not know? And so every once in a while I'd come home and I'd have to sit down and research some of the things that they talked about to see if I got my questions right or not. But once you get your exams, you can become a licensed, and once you take your exams, you can become a licensed architect. You can be licensed in individual states. There are a couple of states that require additional exams. I think New York and California have some additional exams that deal with things like seismic loads and extra like wind forces. So, but for the most part, you can get reciprocity and practice all over the country. So I'm licensed and I've completed projects in many states and didn't need to use my license as long as I was licensed in Colorado. I didn't have to be certified. So these are some places that have hired our students recently. So right now is a super wonderful time to be going into this profession. The market is wild, and we have a lot of. I actually had 2 people approach me this week looking for graduates and even students to work in their offices. And then it's also actually a really great time to go to graduate school. So we've had all EMBD students have been accepted to some incredible schools in the past few years. And I couldn't be more proud of all the hard work. And then they really tend to be very successful in some of these pretty prestigious programs. So that is why you should study architecture. Great. And now Melissa's going to hand it off and take us to the end.
Thanks so much, Jade. Yeah, absolutely. We'll pass it off to Melissa here, and then we'll wrap up. We have just a few questions that have come to the chat for the whole panel, and then we'll make sure we have a few minutes for that survey at the end. So we'll pass it off to you, Melissa.
Have to unmute myself. I'll try to not take up too much time so we have time for questions, but I'm here to talk about environmental product design. So in the EPOD major, we create design leaders who are ready to take on challenges facing humanity and our environments. We focus primarily on physical solutions, so objects that have a physical element to them. We teach a user-centered design approach and a lot of hands-on work, hands-on prototyping, and hands-on work as a way of thinking. And we encourage a lot of experimentation. Fabrication is a huge part of our major, and we also teach a little bit of entrepreneurship, which is one thing that's quite special to our major. And as a EPOD student, you walk out with a creative confidence that you are a problem solver, and we really feel that this confidence that you can solve problems through thinking creatively positions you really well for a myriad of future professions, whether it is squarely within product design, another design discipline, or even something completely unrelated to design, because problem-solving skills are really quite valuable. Like all the majors, we have our studio courses and our seminar courses, and we encourage students to look at product design through the lens of social, economic, cultural, and built environments. And we reflect a theme of sustainability and environmental impact through the understanding of materials, processes, and product life cycle. And at the bottom here, we have this thing that we really believe: everything is a product, we teach process. So almost everything you interact with that is human-made, man-made, is somehow a product. From right now on Zoom, like Zoom is a product. We teach the process of creating all products, but again, we focus primarily on the physical objects. Not to put you on the spot, Scott, but I'm actually gonna disagree that planning is at the largest scale. We feel in EPOD that even though our products are human in scale, we have the potential of impact it at the biggest scale. We can even think about, like, an iPhone is a product that has had a larger impact than perhaps any urban design, and can scale way beyond that. So as a product designer, you do have the potential of having the same impact scale-wise as any of the other majors, from a small subset of specific users to a really, really large, huge swath of the population. And we align ourselves with this quote, but we changed a little: a designer should be able to design anything from a spoon to a city. And this is where I'm going to agree with what Scott said. You can't go wrong with any major, right? Whatever you pick, you're going to walk away being a design thinker, and you'll have that ability no matter where you go, because we really do teach you how to think in this program across all majors. Some of our core tenets in the EPOD major, we teach user-centered design. This means that the person or people you're designing for at the center of your design thinking process. This is a way to avoid making more junk that will end up in a landfill, right? If you really focus on what someone needs, something that will enhance their life, something that is valuable to them, you're going to end up with something that they want to hold on to, that they really want to use every day and will maintain in their lives. We encourage our students to engage in social and environmental issues. We practice iterative prototyping and fabrication, and we explore materials and material life cycle, and we also have a little bit of entrepreneurship. In EPOD 2100, this is our client-led design studio. This studio is run by Uzzer and will be also taught by Jared Arp in the spring. In this studio, we start with a client. There have been a few different versions of this. Uzzer has partnered with the Boulder Journey Valley School at one point, and the students went and met with the teachers, observed the classroom, observed the students, talked to the parents, and designed products specifically for that school and their needs. Occasionally, he does it within the studio where students partner with another student in their studio and design something specifically for that individual. So this is where you're really learning about someone, interviewing them, empathizing with them, and creating something for them. In this studio, we go beyond the level of fabrication that we do in 1110, so you get some advanced fabrication techniques. We continue the education in 3D modeling and rendering. Uzzer also introduces a lot of information about materials, documentation, and communication. And here are some examples of final projects from Uzzer's class. On the bottom right, it's a weather station that is more user-friendly than those that might have a little too much information. He's done a lot with chair design. And on the right, the question was, what do we do about all these Starbucks cups that are ending up in the landfill? And the idea was to create this interactive experience to almost illuminate, the value of this material that's being thrown out. So those are some examples of that. In EPOD 3100, this is what we call our market-led design studio. So out in the real world, you do have to consider what are people able to buy, what are they willing to buy, because you can't do anything without capital. So this is the first studio that really brings in that real world element of making sure that something is marketable. So this requires a lot of user and market research and price, cost, and scale analysis. There's some product-focused entrepreneurship skills and IP stuff, and also storytelling, marketing, and branding. Here on the left, we have the EPOP shop. This is a pop-up shop that one of the 3100 studios designed and built. We still have this, and I think this semester at the end of 3100, the students are going to be in a holiday market where they will be selling the products they designed in the studio, and they will get the profits back from their sales there. So they get to go out in the real world and get feedback on what they made. Here are some examples from EPOP. We have this little toy bin on the right, some planters, a really cool stool, and this toy block situation. You might notice that there's consistency in these boards. This is part of the shop's catalog. So everyone does collaborate in a really interesting way. And while we're on this slide, one thing I really do want to point out, another unique feature of the EPOD major is that you walk away from your studio starting in 1100 with a product that is finished. It's not conceptual, it is physical, it is yours, and you get to keep it. And that's really gratifying. Our product life cycle to make something can be as short as these 8-week studios. So you get to have that full experience of seeing something from concept to execution. Finally, EPOD 4100. This is your capstone studio. It is a culmination of everything you've learned in our curriculum. And we have two sections of this. One of them I teach and one of them Jeremy teaches. And my section is called values-led design. So this is where you show up to the studio and say, I really care about climate change, or I really care about human rights in this part of the world, or I really care about food deserts, which is actually what this project on the left was about food deserts. you show up with that thing that you care about. It could also be like, I love skiing and I want to make a product for skiing, or, you know, I have a family member who has a physical disability and I want to make something to make their life better, right? That you can come with that too. And we go through a series of design exercises through prototyping and brainstorming. You come up with a myriad of ideas and we eventually build a product that addresses your value or your user or your passion. Jeremy teaches a client-led design studio or a self-directed studio. In Jeremy's studio, it's for students who are interested in working with a real-world client. So we partner with the Denver Botanical Gardens, we've partnered with AeroGrow, and I think he's looking to expand that to more. They come to us with a project that they're looking to execute, and then the students spend the semester working with that company to realize their goals. It's a really great professional experience. The self-directed version of Jeremy's studio is a student comes in and is like, I want to make a bicycle that is totally recyclable. Bicyclism probably isn't the best example because that's a little bit mechanical, but anyways, it's for students who come in knowing what they want to make. So they have the full 16 weeks to just hit the ground running with this really clear goal in mind. This is really cool. We have a lot of room for individual need in our major, where it's not, you have this range to say, this is what I care about and this is who I am, and that's how I'm going to focus my design work, and share that voice in your ultimate portfolio, which allows you to position yourself once you're out in the real world to work with the people who align with who you are as a designer and your values. Oops. Also the end of 4100, we have you guys make a Kickstarter style video that accompanies your project, which is a really excellent portfolio piece, and it shows your design communication skills as well. So here are some examples. On the bottom left, this is Caitlin Flick's project. It's actually from spring 2020, so we ended up more digital than physical at that point, but this is a composting product for city dwellers. And the compost goes in the bottom with the worms, and you get the compost tea out of it. You can put it in the dirt above, and there's a terracotta jar where you pour in water and it basically slowly seeps out into the dirt. So it's a really low-tech system, all contained for city dwellers to feel more connected to their food waste and learn about composting and things like that. On the bottom right, I'll just talk about this one. This is an inflatable stretcher for ski patrol. Ski patrol has those big rigid stretchers. They're incredibly hard to work with and ski around with. This student wanted to create a product that solved that problem. So he created this inflatable stretcher that can pack down and make the patrol's life a lot easier. We also have a series of seminars and lectures. Similar to architecture, we have a history course, history of product design, that Uzzer teaches. Then we have a theory and ethics in design that Jeremy teaches. This is really cool because this is where you can start to create your own voice as a designer and decide, this is what I care about and how I want to position myself in this world. And you write a personal design statement. I teach design thinking and entrepreneurship. This is where we go really deep into the methodology behind user-centered design. I'm going through all the different techniques you can use, as well as the last few weeks focusing on entrepreneurship. We talk about branding, marketing, basic business strategies, and it's really fun. And I love that class a lot. And then finally, before your capstone, you take a materials and manufacturing processes, just to give you a better view of what it looks like beyond making that final prototype and scaling up. We suggest a handful of electives in the EPOD major, as you can see here. I'm not going to read through all of them, but these are great. And then once you graduate from EPOD, you have a lot of different paths that you can take. You can immediately go and work for a company. You have a lot of technical skills and design skills that position you well. We have students who are working at Hoka right now, which is really cool. We have students who have started their own design firms. You can also attend graduate school, which I'll talk more about in a minute. grad school is the best. It's super hard, it's super intense, but it's so much fun. And you're like in a little cult for a few years where you're just like all obsessed with the same thing, and it's great. And clearly we're all a bunch of nerds here because we loved grad school so much that we decided to stay in school forever. But in any case, I agree with Jade to fullest degree. It's great to take a year or two off to get to know yourself before you go to grad school and make sure that it's the right place for you, because you do need to be like, this is, I have to go because I have to do this. If you're not in that mindset at grad school, it's not going to work for you. The other cool thing you could do out of EPOD is you could start a business. We have students who have made products as early as 11, 10 in the Luminaire, and they've been so popular with their friends that they start making more and more of them. They open a Shopify site and those businesses are still running. We have a student who graduated who's selling light products at the Seattle Museum of Art, or an art museum in Seattle. So there's some really cool stuff going on there. Here are some careers that you can go into after the EPOD major. Again, I'm not going to read through these, but they're here for you to look at. And we also, there's a huge amount of graduate programs that you can go to. These are all design related that we listed here, but with your problem solving skills and your design thinking skills, I really feel that you could land in a lot of different fields and have a really special edge because of the way you've been able to problem solve throughout the program. This is our lovely EPOD faculty. You might recognize a lot of these faces other than me and Jared from the other majors. And that is EPOD.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa. I just want to note that Siobhan had to leave due to some family things, and Danielle Vilat has joined us to step in. So thank you, Danielle. We just have a few small questions, and I've kind of paired a lot of the questions together to two kind of basic questions that maybe everybody can answer. And Melissa, you kind of got to this at the end of your presentation specifically, but I wonder if each person could spend just a few quick minutes on this. Is kind of, what does a typical position in your major in the first few years look like in the workforce? Like, what are those titles or types of junior level positions that they should be thinking about or looking at in terms of what are those expectations or ideas of what kind of that looks like? So Scott, maybe you could start and we'll go through in the order that we presented.
Dylan, it depends on whether you go in the public or private route. Junior designers do details, you know, under the supervision of a more senior person. And as in the public sector, very often you'll do a lot of plan review and come to understand the codes. And then after that, you can start to draft codes and draft master plans. So you start evaluating current work. And then as you move forward in the profession, you start to translate civic political needs into codes and regulations.
Great, thank you. Danielle, do you want to talk a little about landscape architecture?
Yes, of course. So I'd say within your first 18 months in general in any field, it's going to be a huge learning curve, right?
Yeah.
So for landscape architecture specifically, you're going to get used to whatever the standards are in the office for creating construction documents, kind of like Scott was saying. There's also a lot of going to meetings and just being there and being present and listening to what the questions are, understanding how to interpret client needs versus the site's needs, especially too. You also, there's no guarantee for scale. So each different firm has a different scales that they work at. So if you're going to a residential design firm, you're going to work at that scale. If you're going into more like a city landscape architect position or a landscape designer position, you're going to be working at a slightly larger scale. But then there's also, you know, master plan communities, there's parks, there's also some type of overlap with planning, and we do a lot of urban design as well. But I'd say a lot of your first 18 months are really going to be listening and learning, both in technology side, but also for client needs, because a lot of times what they say that they want isn't necessarily what they want or what the community needs. So your job is to listen and learn how to synthesize and to work in a multitude of scales, because we'll do plans that are at 1 inch equals 1,000 feet, but then we'll have to do a detail for that signage that goes down to the 1/4 inch. So a lot of it is learning how to work in multiple scales at that time too. But nice thing is, if you come in with a good technology background, which a lot of our graduates do, you can do a lot of cool renderings, right? So you'll be part of the production process, not and in whatever way that they see fit. And you'll be able to find kind of niches for yourself and what you bring to the table. So I'm also a big advocate for speaking up for the type of experience that you want. So I wanted a lot of construction administration and cost estimate experience in my job. And because that's typically not what people speak up to do, they're like, absolutely, here, go for it. Do all the CA jobs that you'd like to do. So depending on what you want, it's a big learning curve, but also don't be afraid to ask for what you want.
Awesome. Thank you. Jade, you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so definitely similar to a lot of the things that Scott and Danielle already said. So typically you will know whatever, a lot of different software at the point that you get a job. But any design, any architecture firm is going to have the software that they tend to use. So they will usually train you on it, and they'll actually work with you on their conventions and standards of how they do things. So you'll probably spend a lot of time looking at drawings that are close to being permitted and then making changes that someone has already redlined. So they'll say, this wall needs to move over 6 inches. Let's change this window. Can you make sure that, the schedules for framing and those things are actually lining up. So you learn so much by reading other people's drawings. But in addition to that, you'll be going to a lot of meetings. You'll probably be meeting with people in the city, in the county. You'll probably be meeting with clients and contractors and people that are doing some fabrication as well. So you get a lot of different experience, and the more that you can absorb and see what you like. I mean, I would encourage you to have more than one job in a design firm, just because what one firm does, it's like 10 people, is going to be very different than a firm that maybe has 40 or 50.
Awesome. Thanks, Jade. And Melissa, want to wrap up with your thoughts?
Yeah. It really depends on the path you decide to take. If you're going in to work as a designer for a company, you'll probably start with the title of junior designer. This is where you will be doing smaller projects, typically within constraints. And as you master those, you'll start to move up that ladder, become an associate designer, and so on and so forth, eventually getting more creative control. We have a lot of students who get that first job because they have really great technical skills coming out of our major. So it could be your fluency in 3D modeling, 3D rendering, and the Adobe Creative Suites that kind of get you in that door. You might start as a technical designer and then move up to junior designer. I think we all know that entry-level jobs require 3 to 5 years experience. So that technical designer role can help you get those 3 to 5 years experience. So again, we do have a student, Cody Thurston, who started doing the technical designer and is now an associate shoe designer. We also, again, have students who started their own design firm. So if you do something like that, you might start doing smaller projects for friends or your parents' friends, your own network, and then slowly grow to clients that have a higher clout, I guess, and have more brand recognition. We also have students who just start their own business right after school. So we have a student who started a camper thing business. He makes the little campers that hook up to your cars, and he is fully running that business, and he started that right out of school. So we do have a lot of different pathways from EPOD, and where you start will very much be about who you are and where you want to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much.